That night the silence in the car was almost tangible. I was coming back from yet another endless dinner, where forced smiles and empty conversations filled the suffocating air. Lucas was driving as usual. The sound of the engine seemed to amplify the loneliness that consumed me. I looked in the rearview mirror without much thought. And that's when our eyes met. Something, at that moment, changed. I felt my heart race as if, for the first time, I was really seeing this man who, until then, had just been a familiar figure in my daily life. Lucas had a calm expression, but his eyes said something else. It was as if he carried an entire universe behind that reserved look. I watched, trying to understand what was happening inside me. He was the family driver, someone who, in the cold logic of my world, should have been invisible. But not at that moment. In that instant, I felt something I couldn't explain. It was as if a part of me, long dormant, suddenly awakened with force. A whirlwind of emotions began to take over, and I knew that nothing would be the same again. When we arrived at the mansion, I hesitated for a second before getting out of the car. The night was cold, and the sharp wind seemed to mirror the confusion growing inside me. As I got out, I couldn't help but glance at Lucas again, as if searching for answers in the silence. He opened the door for me with the same courtesy as always, but there was a tension in the air, something unspoken hanging between us. And it was at that simple gesture that I knew. Something was starting that I would never be able to control.
At 25, Gabby had always been different from her family. The daughter of one of the biggest landowners in the region, she grew up surrounded by luxury and opulence, but never felt like she belonged to that world. While her sisters and mother were immersed in the trivialities of high society, worried about the latest fashion trends or their next vacation destination, Gabby distanced herself. The empty conversations at dinners and parties bored her. She felt like a stranger in her own home, searching for something more real, something more meaningful. She found refuge in her volunteer work, far from her family's judgmental eyes. Gabby spent entire afternoons in the streets, handing out food to those in need. It was there, among ordinary people, that she felt like one of them. Despite her family name and status, in that setting, she was just Gabby, a young woman wanted to make a difference. During these trips, Lucas, the family's driver, often accompanied her. Although he was discreet and spoke little, Gabby felt a silent connection with him, as if they shared a similar outlook on life. Unlike her sisters, who called Lucas for extravagant events, Gabby rarely asked for his services. She liked driving herself, feeling the freedom behind the wheel, escaping, even for a few hours, from the gilded prison she lived in. But in the weeks when donations needed to be delivered, Lucas would go with her. He never asked any questions, but Gabby noticed how he observed the people in the streets, with a look that went beyond his role as a driver. It was during these trips that Lucas's presence started to become more than just a formality. Without realizing it, he was entering her thoughts, even when she tried to convince herself that it didn't make sense. That afternoon, Gabby didn't expect the food distribution to turn into chaos. It was one of the toughest weeks, and the families waiting for donations were especially desperate. The tension in the air was growing, and suddenly, the calm she was used to feeling in these situations started to unravel. People were pushing against each other, and Gabby, in the middle of the crowd, sensed the imminent danger. In a matter of seconds, the turmoil intensified, and she lost her balance. For a brief moment, everything around her seemed to collapse, and she saw the ground coming closer quickly. But before she could fall, a strong hand caught her firmly. It was Lucas. He held her with care, as if he knew exactly how fragile that moment was for her. Gabby felt his body close to hers, the touch of his firm and steady hands. A chill ran down her spine, a feeling she had never experienced before. It was something inexplicable, as if that touch had awakened something long asleep in her heart. Lucas pulled her away from the chaos, protecting her from any danger. For an instant, her eyes met his, and in that deep gaze, Gabby saw more than just a driver. She saw a man. Lucas had always been discreet, polite, almost invisible in the routines of the mansion. Tall and strong, with tan skin and a calm expression, he never showed his emotions. His life story, marked by hardships, wasn't something he easily shared. Lucas's father worked as a gardener on the estate, and his mother had abandoned him when he was still a child, leaving him in his father's care. Since then, Lucas had become the foundation of the family, working to help with expenses and paying for his own studies. He had bigger dreams than anyone imagined. He wanted to become a doctor, but for now, reality demanded that he sacrifice those dreams to take care of those he loved. As Gabby tried to catch her breath, still feeling the gentle pressure of Lucas's hands on her skin, something shifted inside her. That touch, the way he held her, with so much care and respect, made her heart race. She had always known Lucas was different, but now she felt attracted to him in a way she had never felt before. And no matter how much she tried to push the thought away, the shiver she felt through her body revealed a truth she wasn't ready to accept. Something was starting there in the silence of that first touch. Gabby tried to mask the whirlwind of emotions she felt with a sudden cough. She needed to get away from Lucas as quickly as possible before he realized how much that touch had affected her. Without looking directly at him, she asked in a shaky voice, "Lucas, I think we should go back home. I'm going out later tonight." She was agitated, her mind racing. She needed to get away from that place, to leave behind the confusion her heart was creating. It must be loneliness, she thought. After all, how could she feel something for someone she barely talked to? Lucas, as always, simply nodded and drove her back to the mansion. On the way, Gabby tried to rationalize. It was absurd. Lucas was just the driver. They barely exchanged words beyond what was necessary. They spoke politely, formally, and occasionally, their eyes met in the rearview mirror. But she always thought it was just him doing his job, ensuring the safety of the millionaire's daughter, as was his duty. The fact that their eyes had crossed so many times had been just a coincidence. Or at least that's what Gabby tried to convince herself. When they arrived home, she decided she needed to push those thoughts away. That afternoon had been traumatic, and she didn't want to let something so small grow inside her. To prove it, she came up with a plan. She would pretend she had a date with a guy to go to the movies that night, something her mother and sisters would usually encourage. The goal was simple, to show that she was fine, that Lucas had no effect on her. When it was time to leave, Gabby intentionally asked Lucas to take her. She wanted him to see that she was the same Gabby as always, carefree and untouchable. She needed to convince not only him, but herself that nothing had changed. In the car, the silence was heavy. Gabby was restless, fidgeting with her hands, while Lucas drove as usual, focused on the road. She looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror, expecting to find the same distant, professional look as always, but for some reason, that bothered her. She tried her best to act naturally, talking about the movie she was supposedly going to see and how exhausting the day had been. It was all a desperate attempt to distract her mind from what she was really feeling. And as the car moved through the streets of Mine Salt, Gabby fought internally, trying to suppress the truth her heart already knew. Lucas was no longer just an employee to her. When the car stopped in front of the mall, Gabby took a deep breath. She tried to keep her composure, but her heart was still racing. Lucas got out of the car, walking calmly to Gabby's door. When he opened it, extending his hand in a formal manner, she felt that same inexplicable shiver again. The simple touch of their hands sent a wave of confusion through her entire body, and she wondered once again what was happening to her. Why was this man, with whom she barely had any intimacy, stirring so many feelings inside her? Lucas, always discreet, noticed the discomfort in her eyes. "Do you want me to wait for you, or would you prefer to do something else?" he asked, as calm as ever. Gabby, however, felt more lost than ever. The plan was for him to see that she was with another guy, that nothing from that afternoon had left a mark. But the truth was that ever since he had held her, her thoughts couldn't stop revolving around him. Forcing a smile, she replied, "No, you're dismissed, Lucas. I'll be going home with George." She tried to sound firm, but there was a slight tremor in her voice. Lucas simply nodded, as he always did, without questioning. "As you wish, ma'am," he said, closing the car door gently before walking away. Gabby watched as he got into the car and drove off. The knot in her chest tightened. She knew she was trying to fool herself, but the more she tried, the deeper she sank into confusion. As soon as he was out of sight, Gabby picked up the phone and called her friend. She needed to talk to someone about what was happening, and there was no one better than Mariana to listen. "Mari, I need you here. Now. It's not what you think, but I don't know what to do," Gabby said, trying to explain, though she didn't fully understand herself. Less than an hour later, Mariana arrived at the mall. When she heard the whole story, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you telling me you're falling for the driver?" "Gabby, are you serious?" she asked, shocked, as she tried to process the situation. The two spent a few hours together, talking about the confusion taking over Gabby's mind. Mariana tried to rationalize things, saying that maybe it was just a moment of vulnerability, but Gabby knew it was more than that. She could feel it. It wasn't something she could simply ignore. As the night wore on, they decided it was best for Gabby to go home. Mariana offered to drive her, and Gabby gladly accepted. She needed a little more time to process everything before facing Lucas again. When Mariana's car arrived at the mansion, Gabby noticed the unmistakable shape of Lucas's car parked near the entrance. He was there, as always, punctual and discreet. Before she could get out of the car, Lucas was already beside it, opening the door for them. And then, to Gabby's surprise, he smiled. Not a regular smile, but a mischievous grin that said more than words. It was as if he knew exactly what she had done. He knew there was no George. And worse, he knew she was trying to hide what she felt. Gabby was embarrassed, her face turning slightly red. She got out of the car in silence, trying not to look directly at Lucas. But she knew he had noticed everything. Her plan had failed. Now, in addition to being confused, she felt exposed. And in that brief moment, seeing the subtle smile on Lucas's face, Gabby was sure of one thing. He felt something for her too. In the days that followed, Gabby did everything she could to avoid Lucas. The confusion in her mind was unbearable, and the best solution she could find was to keep her distance. She stopped requesting his services, preferring to drive herself whenever she needed to go out. The silence between them became heavy, but necessary. She didn't know how to act, how to handle what was growing inside her. Every time she saw him around the house, her heart raced, and her mind spiraled into a whirlwind of thoughts she tried, unsuccessfully, to control. Even so, something irresistibly drew her toward him. Gabby always found an excuse to go to her bedroom window or walk outside the house. It wasn't just a need to see him, but also an internal struggle to understand what was really happening. In the moments when Lucas passed by the property, taking care of his tasks, she would watch from a distance, disguising her interest. She didn't have the courage to face him, but she couldn't stay away either. One afternoon, Gabby went to the living room window. The heavy curtain blocked most of the view, but there was a small gap where she could see the yard. Her gaze inevitably went to the garage, where Lucas was washing the cars. But something different caught her attention this time. He wasn't wearing a shirt. The muscles of his tanned body glistened in the sunlight, and drops of water slid down his defined chest. Gabby froze, unable to look away. It was as if time had stopped. Lucas, focused on his work, didn't notice her at first. But then, as if sensing the intensity of her gaze, he raised his head and looked directly at the window. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, everything seemed even more confusing. Gabby's heart pounded. He saw her. She knew she shouldn't have been there, that she should have controlled herself, but it was too late. Without thinking, she ran from the window and rushed upstairs to her room, her face burning with embarrassment. She closed the door and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath while her mind replayed the scene. Lucas had seen her watching him, and for the first time, she couldn't deny to herself what she was feeling. The following days were even harder. Gabby remained silent, avoiding any possibility of contact with him. She continued to drive herself to all her appointments, avoiding asking for Lucas's help, hoping that the distance would help her forget. But every time she passed him in the house, Lucas's calm and respectful gaze reminded her of what had happened. He didn't confront her, didn't ask any questions, but she felt that he knew, that he noticed her pulling away and, in some way, respected her decision. However, the distance didn't ease the weight in her heart. Every time she tried to escape her feelings, they came back even stronger. And now, more than ever, Gabby knew she could no longer ignore what was happening between them. The days of silence stretched on, and the tension between Gabby and Lucas seemed to grow with each passing moment. She continued avoiding any direct interaction, but the desire to see him, to be near him, became unbearable. Lucas, always respectful, maintained his discreet posture, even sensing the distance. But the fleeting glances they exchanged from afar spoke more than any words could. There was something between them, something undeniable, yet so wrong in the context of their lives. Gabby's family didn't make things easier. Her father, a powerful and distant man, rarely spoke to his children. He lived for business and barely showed up for family events. Her mother, on the other hand, was always busy with parties and gatherings, lining up suitors for her daughters. Wealthy men, sons of high society friends, were constantly introduced to Gabby and her sisters in an attempt to secure advantageous marriages. The name Lucas would never even cross her mother's mind, and Gabby knew it. But what tormented her was the fact that every day, Lucas was the only person she truly thought about. One afternoon, after yet another failed attempt to escape her feelings, Gabby decided to walk through the mansion's gardens, hoping to clear her mind. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. She followed the stone paths, her thoughts as distant as the view before her. And then, without realizing it, her steps led her near the garage, where Lucas was finishing up some maintenance on the cars. This time, he had his back to her, focused on his work. Gabby's heart raced at the sight of him. There was something about that moment, the stillness of the evening, that felt different. Perhaps it was the silence of the house, or the fact that, for once, they were completely alone. She stopped, hesitant, but something was pulling her closer. Without thinking, she took a few more steps toward him, her feet almost soundless on the stone path. Lucas, as if sensing her presence, slowly turned around. His eyes met hers, and at that moment, Gabby knew there was no more running away. The air around them seemed charged with something invisible, a force drawing them together. Lucas said nothing but took a step toward her, his expression calm but intense. And then, unable to control herself, Gabby felt her body move on its own. She stepped closer too, until they were so close that they could feel each other's breath. For a moment, they just looked at each other, both aware of what this meant. It was wrong, completely forbidden. Gabby knew her mother would never accept it, and their world would never allow something like this to happen. But the desire in their hearts was stronger. Without thinking, Lucas raised his hand slowly and touched her face gently, as if afraid to break the moment. At the feel of his skin, Gabby closed her eyes, feeling a shiver run through her entire body. They stood there, in that silent touch for seconds that felt like an eternity. There were no words. There was no need to say anything. The touch was a confession of everything they had been trying to avoid. Gabby opened her eyes and looked at Lucas with a mix of fear and desire. He knew it, and so did she. This was more than just a simple attraction. It was something they could no longer deny. "This can't happen, Gabby," Lucas murmured, breaking the silence but not pulling his hand away. "We both know that." She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. She knew he was right, but her heart refused to accept it. The desire to be with him was overwhelming, and for a brief moment, Gabby didn't care about the consequences. She took another step, closing the distance between them until their bodies almost touched. She felt the intensity of that closeness, the warmth that radiated from him. The world around them disappeared, and nothing else mattered but the two of them. Lucas, hesitant, slid his other hand to Gabby's waist, gently pulling her closer. The touch of their bodies made Gabby shudder, and in that moment they knew. What was between them was real, intense, and impossible to ignore. But the cruel reality soon crept into that moment. It was wrong, forbidden, and they both knew the weight of it. Gabby stepped back slightly, her eyes full of doubt and confusion. "My mother, my family," she murmured, her voice trembling. She knew her mother was obsessed with arranging a marriage for her with some wealthy heir, someone who would keep the family's status intact. The very idea of someone like Lucas would never even be considered. And her father, with his indifference, would never approve of something that didn't serve his financial interests. "I know," Lucas said, his voice deep but full of understanding. He felt the weight of reality too, but the desire to be with Gabby was undeniable. And at that moment, despite everything, they knew that something between them had changed forever. The night fell gently over the mansion, and Gabby was in her room, her mind in turmoil. She knew she needed to resolve what was happening between her and Lucas. She felt torn between the overwhelming desire to be with him and the knowledge that, as much as she wanted it, it was impossible. Lucas needed his job, and she knew her family would never accept something like this. The most logical solution would be to distance herself from him, to end what had barely even begun. But her heart wanted something else. Without thinking much, Gabby made a decision. She picked up the phone and called Lucas, asking him to take her somewhere. She didn't have a destination in mind. The real goal was to get out of there and have a private conversation. He answered promptly, as always, without questioning. When she came downstairs, he was already waiting in the car, and Gabby got into the back seat, trying to maintain the appearance of formality, but her heart was pounding so hard that she could barely breathe. During the ride, the silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words. Gabby looked out the window, the scenery passing by in a blur as she tried to organize her thoughts. They drove for a while, until she spotted a small park ahead. "Lucas, can you stop here?" she asked, her voice softer than she had intended. He nodded and parked the car in the most discreet spot, turning off the engine. The two got out of the car and walked a few steps in silence to a quieter part of the park. The cool night air was refreshing, but Gabby felt the warmth of Lucas beside her, making her even more nervous. She needed to speak. She needed to say that this couldn't go on. She turned to him, ready to start the conversation she had been dreading. "Lucas, we can't do this. This can't happen," she began, her voice trembling. "You need this job, and I—" But before she could finish, Lucas stepped forward and, with a swiftness that caught her off guard, placed his large, firm hand over her mouth, silencing her words. Gabby froze, her eyes locked on his, now filled with something much more intense. Before she could protest, she felt his arm move to her waist, pulling her firmly but gently against his body. And then, without saying anything, he kissed her. The world around them seemed to disappear. All that existed in that moment was the heat of his lips on hers, the strong yet soft touch. Gabby kissed him back, unable to fight the desire consuming her. That kiss was everything they both wanted, but had tried to deny. It was forbidden, dangerous, but at the same time, inevitable. They were lost in that moment, and there was no going back. The next day, Gabby couldn't contain her excitement and called her friend Maria. "Mary, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice nervous and excited. When Maria arrived at the mansion, Gabby spilled the whole story. The kiss, the desire, the fear. Her friend, after hearing everything, was horrified. "Have you lost your mind, Gabby? This is so dangerous. What if someone finds out? What about your family? He could lose his job, and you can't do this to him," Maria warned, her words full of concern. Despite the warnings, Gabby and Lucas continued to see each other in secret. They knew it was risky, but they couldn't stay away from each other. Each meeting was furtive, full of tension and the fear of being discovered, but the passion between them grew stronger every day. Lucas was careful, never showing anything in front of the family, and Gabby did her best to keep up appearances. But everything changed one night at a party at the mansion. Gabby's mother, obsessed with the idea of arranging a rich suitor for her daughters, kept insisting that Gabby dance with a young heir, the son of a family friend. The young man was handsome, elegant, and all the other girls looked at him with admiration. But Gabby's heart felt heavy. She tried to refuse several times, but her mother was relentless. "Gabby, stop being stubborn. Go and dance with him. He's perfect for you," her mother insisted, smiling at her friends, as if she had already sealed her daughter's fate. Reluctantly, Gabby gave in. "Fine, Mom. I'll go," she said, defeated. as the young man approached and led her to the dance floor. But as she spun in the arms of the suitor, her eyes searched for Lucas. He was there near the entrance watching everything from afar. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Gabby saw the pain in his eyes. Lucas looked away, and before she could react, he turned and walked out into the garden. Desperate, Gabby broke free from the young man. "I'm sorry, I have to go," she said quickly, leaving the dance floor and running after Lucas. She rushed through the mansion's hallways and found him near the gates, about to leave. "Lucas, wait!" she shouted, her heart racing. When he turned to her, his face was serious, but there was sadness in his eyes. "Gabby, this isn't going to work," Lucas said, his voice low and full of pain. "You and I, we're from different worlds. I'm just the driver. I'm poor, and you deserve someone better. Someone your family will accept." She felt a tightness in her chest. "I don't want someone better, Lucas. I want you. I don't care what they think. Please don't go." He shook his head, frustrated. "You don't understand, Gabby. I'll never be enough for you. No matter how much I want this, we can't keep going." Gabby's eyes filled with tears. "But I love you, Lucas. Doesn't that matter?" Lucas hesitated for a moment, the pain evident on his face. "It matters, but sometimes love isn't enough." Without saying anything else, he turned and walked away, leaving Gabby standing in the garden, her heart shattered. Gabby went to her room, completely lost. Her thoughts swirled like a storm, and the emptiness in her chest consumed her. The idea that Lucas was gone tormented her. She knew he was right, that the worlds they lived in were different, but the pain of his absence was unbearable. Silent tears streamed down her face as she looked out the window, where the garden remained quiet and dark, but her heart screamed for his presence. The next morning, when she came down for breakfast, Gabby was informed that Lucas had quit. The ground seemed to open beneath her feet. How could he just leave like that, without even saying goodbye? Desperate, she went to the garden, where Mr. John, the gardener and Lucas's father, was tending to the plants as usual. Gabby approached, her heart pounding. "Mr. John, how can I talk to Lucas?" she asked, her voice trembling. The old gardener looked at her with a sad but understanding expression. "He's gone, Gabby. He doesn't want to cause you any more trouble. But I know where he is. If you really want to talk to him, I can tell you." Without thinking twice, Gabby asked him to tell her. Determined, she went after Lucas, not caring what her family would say or what would happen next. When she found him, he was in a small rented house, already preparing to move on with his life away from the mansion. When he saw her, Lucas tried to hide his surprise, but Gabby ran to him without hesitation. They hugged tightly, as if time and distance between them no longer existed. The tears came quickly, both crying, relieved yet anguished by everything they had been through. "I don't want to run away anymore, Lucas. I can't," Gabby said between sobs, clinging to him. "I need you, and I don't care what my family thinks. We deserve to be happy." Lucas held her close, his heart full of emotion. "I don't want to run anymore either, Gabby. But I'm afraid of what your family might do to you to me." She looked into his eyes, feeling the love and pain in every word. "We'll face it together." Gabby knew the battle was just beginning, but she wouldn't give up. The next day, armed with courage and determination, she decided to have a final conversation with her family. She knew it would be hard, but she was ready to take a stand, no matter what happened. She called her mother and father for a private talk. The atmosphere was tense, and her hands trembled, but she took a deep breath and began. "I need you to understand something," Gabby began, her voice low but firm. "I'm in love with Lucas." Her mother let out a nervous laugh, clearly in disbelief. "The driver? This is a joke, Gabby. You can't be serious." Gabby looked at her, tears welling up in her eyes, but determined. "I'm serious, Mom. I love him, and we're together." The silence that followed was heavy. Her father, who rarely got involved in family matters, remained quiet, but the disappointment in his eyes was clear. Her mother, furious, began to speak, her voice loud and accusatory. "You're destroying everything. Don't you get it? Your life was planned for something bigger. He's nothing, Gabby. A driver and nobody. I've lined up perfect suitors for you and your sisters, and you want to throw it all away for a man with no future." Her mother's words cut deep, but Gabby didn't back down. With tears in her eyes, she replied, "He does have a future, and he's so much more than that. He's good, he's honest, and he makes me happy. And I'll fight for this, even if you don't accept it." The conversation ended in shouts and tears. Gabby left for her room devastated, but with one certainty: she wouldn't give up on Lucas, even if her family turned their backs on her. As time passed, things began to change. Lucas, determined to move forward, found a job as a driver for another company, which paid much better than his job at the mansion. But he had bigger dreams, and Gabby knew it. With her support, Lucas finally enrolled in medical school, something he had always wanted but could never pursue due to financial constraints. Their life wasn't easy, but it was full of purpose. Every day together was a struggle, but also a victory. Their love grew, fueled by sacrifice and the courage to face what seemed impossible. Gabby distanced herself from her family, who never fully accepted the relationship, but that didn't stop her from moving forward. She knew that what she had with Lucas was real, and that was all that mattered. They were building a new life, a life that was just theirs. Lucas was on his way to fulfilling his dream of becoming a doctor, and Gabby, though her heart still ached from her family's rejection, knew she had made the right choice. The love they shared was strong enough to withstand anything, and in the end, that was all they needed. Time passed, and with it, the wounds began to heal. Gabby and Lucas, together, overcame the challenges life threw at them. One afternoon, as Lucas finished another day of classes at medical school, Gabby received an unexpected call. It was her mother. The voice on the other end of the line sounded different. There was no longer the tone of superiority or judgment. There was something new: regret. "Gabby, I'd like to talk. We need to discuss everything that happened," her mother said, in a softer tone than ever before. The next day, Gabby met her parents. Her mother, with tearful eyes, confessed that she had never understood the true love her daughter felt for Lucas. "I was wrong. I wanted so badly to control your life that I forgot the most important thing: your happiness. I just wanted the best for you, but I see now that the best was already by your side. Can you forgive me?" she said, tears streaming silently down her face. Her father, who had always been distant, also spoke up for the first time. "I didn't know how to handle this, Gabby, but I see now that Lucas is a man of integrity. If he's your love, then he has my respect too." With tears in her eyes, Gabby hugged her parents. The weight she had carried in her heart for so long was finally lifted. "I just wanted you to understand what he means to me. And now that you see that, it means everything," she said, overcome with emotion. Days later, with her heart lighter, Gabby told Lucas everything. When he heard about the reconciliation, he hugged her with the same firmness and care he had always shown. "I told you that sometimes love wasn't enough, but I think I was wrong. Our love was strong enough to change everything," he said, with a calm and tender smile. They knew then that what they had built together, the respect, the mutual support, and above all, the unconditional love, was something that neither time nor circumstances could destroy. Gabby and Lucas had fought against all odds, and in the end, their love prevailed. And as they walked together toward a promising future, Lucas holding Gabby's hand, the sun set, painting the sky with shades of gold and pink, as if the universe itself was blessing their union. They knew that, no matter what happened, they would always stand by each other's side, because true love, the kind you fight for and live intensely, always finds a way to triumph. I hope you enjoyed this moving story of love and resilience between Gabby and Lucas. If you liked it, please don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this. Your support is very important for us to continue bringing more content filled with emotions. See you next time.